All right, يلا تفضل يا أستاذ.
Welcome everyone. It's good to have you today. I'm Jaron, as you know. We have an exciting opportunity to talk a little bit about the history and culture of Jordan, also talking about how to interact with like culture, what that is, and how you're going to experience it as students. First, I have a couple of announcements to make sure that y'all are aware. Reminder about the required documents for this class. The due date is by class, by our next class, which is the 3rd of April, I believe, so next Tuesday. And those are just like the required ones, your passport information and your non-proselyting agreement. So make sure those are sent to me, send them through Slack or give them to me in person.
The gym one, do you have a date for that?
The gym one is okay whenever.
You know what? For the gym one, you can get a way cheap physical in Jordan. So I would just wait on your gym.
Yeah, like you just have to have that before we get to the Jerusalem Center. And you can do that. And there are physicals in Jordan, and I've heard it's quite the adventure. So there's that. Second thing, if you are struggling to access the box or you feel like there's things happening that you're not aware of or where are the video links, please check the travel/dash logistics Slack channel. I have not had anyone who was struggling with box and then tried the link that I posted on there and it didn't work. So it's resolved the issue for everyone. So if you have an issue, check there, and if it hasn't been answered, then just direct message me and I'll help you resolve it. But this is just a general shout out. There's like helpful things happening on Slack that will probably make all of our lives easier if we all look at them. The last thing is I have been posting some things in the activities channel. These are not required, they're optional. I think that they are great activities happening here on campus this week, most of them, especially for people who want to expand their understanding of the Middle East prior to going to Jordan. I also think that they're great for anyone studying the Middle East. Of particular note, I think for all of you going to study abroad, is the book of the semester lecture tomorrow, which is Notes on a Foreign Country, and it is the author's Susie Hansen's reflections on living in the Middle East and thinking about America and conceptualizing America from the Middle East and what that meant for her and how she came to understand that. And I think that it's supposed to be really good. And Professor Meekum also strongly recommended it for the advanced MESA students that are in his classes. So, something to bear in mind. All right, history of the Middle East, history of Jordan. Who here, like how many of you have taken like any history classes on the Middle East? I think, how many of you have finished a history class in the Middle East? Most of you are in 241 right now. Okay, sweet. So, I want to preface this with a word, but first a word. Be aware, everything that I'm saying is like deeply affected by my personal like experiences in the Middle East and my biases. Like, I try not to be super Eurocentric or whatever, but I am from America, educated in American University, and a lot of the things that I say are from, everything I say is from that perspective. And you're going to like hear things from Jordanians, you're going to hear things from Palestinians, a lot of you will hear things from Israelis, and you will suddenly realize that there's all these conflicting perspectives on history, on fact, that there are things that are different. And then the way that we talk about the same facts will often be different. So I want you to be aware of that going into this lecture, and also this experience, that you are going to have to do some legwork here in understanding even things like history, that people have a vested interest in parts of history. Also, I want you to be aware that you are going to experience Jordan differently than basically any Jordanian would ever do it. And I think that I usually don't, I try not to like avoid like pulling mission stories into it, but I think this is an important thing to understand, that missionaries have a very different perspective of places that they serve than someone who lives there, because they're required to have this weird cross section. Like they'll door knock an entire apartment building. Like I've lived in apartment buildings where I don't know everyone in it, I haven't interacted with them. And while you're in Jordan, you'll interact with people from all different social classes, from different nationalities. You won't have a stable social group or family group going into the experience. So you're going to like hear people talk about Jordan, and you'll like meet someone that says like women don't have to like wear like be covered, be veiled in public, like they won't be harassed, that's ridiculous. And then you'll meet other people that are like, and they'll say that about Jordan, and there'll be other people that say like a woman going out unveiled is inappropriate and she deserves what she gets. And I think that both of those.
Can I just ask a question? How many of you have heard already from a BYU co-ed, Jordanian or Palestinian, why are they making you do that? That's ridiculous. Anybody already? Okay. Ammon, they said you didn't need to wear things.
Well, not me personally.
But this is it's very common that we have people not helpful saying, that's so dumb. And these are people from a social class that they almost never interact with the people you're going to be interacting with, right?
And I don't think that, like, I think that both of these worldviews are, like, people aren't, like, trying to deceive you, or they're not trying to protect you necessarily. Like, they might actually believe that is the reality of Jordan. In the same way that when someone asks me about race relations in America, coming from someone who grew up in Chicago, and they ask someone else from Utah, and they ask someone from Alabama, and they ask someone from, like, Southern California, and from Oregon, all of those answers are going to be very different, and to each of those people, it's the reality. Like, that's the world that they are perceiving, and that's their culture. So I want you to understand that you are going to see Jordan, you're going to get conflicting messages from people while you're there, before you go there, after you go there, and you're going to have to understand that there's some things that you will see that are actually, you're going to see them more clearly than native Jordanians, and other things that will not make any sense, and you just won't have very good cultural insight. So just bear that in mind. All right, ancient history. We talked a little bit about the biblical history, but going back further, Jordan's been inhabited by humans since the Paleolithic era. We're going to have the opportunity to see lots of cool archaeological sites. We'll be able to visit Petra, which is super cool. If you've ever been to southern Utah, imagine southern Utah, but there's just like an ancient civilization carved into the canyons that you're hiking through, and it's amazing. I highly recommend. Facts like in the Bronze Age, Ammon, Moab, Edom, all these are referenced in the scriptures. There's this like these weird threads of like someone will tell you something, and you'll be like, wait, I know that name from somewhere. It'll be the Old Testament, sometimes the New Testament, and you'll just have to figure out what that means to you and how you're going to deal with that. As time goes on, you have the Nabatean Kingdom, the Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire. I think that there's really interesting history and effects from all of these, but I'm not going to touch too much on it today because the more modern history is much more present for us and also for shaping of Jordanian culture as we know it today. But you should know that there is a deep pride in this ancient history, and when a lot of Jordanians that you talk to will have a lot of pride in this idea, like this is a land that people have lived in. There is a deep heritage here that for people who have grown up in America, we generally don't have access to that kind of like repository of historical pride, right? We're like, yeah, 1776 was awesome, great start to history. Which is exciting, but there was like, for a really long time before that, Jordan was a hopping place to be. All right, going on to modern history. Who here knows, so the first date, 1922, Transjordan is part of the British Mandate. It is a state under British supervision. Does anyone like know why that happened? Or can anyone explain like, what is that? Stephen?
So you have World War I going on, and in 1916 the British approached King Hussein of he was the Sheikh of Mecca, and they were trying to get him to rise up against the Ottoman Empire. They promised him in return that he will be able to form an Arab kingdom across the different Middle Eastern countries that were there. The British really didn't understand what they were getting into, but at the same time, the British and the French in 1916 also created the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which divided the Middle East between the two of them for after the war, without letting the Arabs or later on the Jews through the Balfour Declaration know. So in the end of World War I, you have the Middle East divided and carved into different sections that are administered under the premise of League of Nations mandates, but secretly it's basically occupation and colonialization in another word. And the British, Transjordan and Jerusalem are kind of like seen as like an independent international zone, but really the British are the ones calling the shots.
Sweet. So, how do y'all feel on your geography of the Middle East? Pretty solid. Where is Mecca? Saudi Arabia. And where is Jordan? Is that like, I don't know, these are like stupid questions. Mecca's not in Jordan. What was the Sheikh of Mecca, or his family actually, what were they, like why would they be in Jordan is this question, and well, Zach would like to answer. Go for it.
If I remember correctly, like the Hashemites, they kind of ruled the Hijaz for a while.
Yeah.
And eventually, the Saudis kind of just took it.
Yeah. So like weird historical like happenings go on where this like kingdoms have been promised to the Hashemite family, but there's like all of these like contradictory international promises, that sort of thing. The Hashemites then, who were rulers of the Hijaz, which is this western coast of Saudi Arabia, which is important pilgrimage sites and trade routes, are pushed out of what we now call Saudi Arabia by Ibn Saud and his family, along with Ibn Wahhab, who is basically the beginning of this religious sect called Wahhabism, which is the dominant religious sect to this day in Saudi Arabia, which is from Ibn Saud. So they're pushed out, but they're still calling in this promise from Britain. So Britain says, Arabs are Arabs, so we've got this Transjordan place, and we've got Iraq. So the two sons of the Sheikh are made the rulers of the new British mandate of Transjordan and the British mandate of Iraq. So it's important to understand that as we think about where, like, how is a nation formed, what is like nationalism, all that stuff. But 1946, 24 years later, Jordan is now no longer under British control, basically because my view of it is Britain like ran out of energy to deal with it, like it wasn't worth it to them anymore. And there's like various other things going on. There's also international pressure, self-determination, that sort of thing. Anyone know what happened in 1948 in that region? Yeah, I heard one of you whisper it. Louder, Roman. Israel becomes a state. And thus begins this 46-year period of an official state of war between Jordan and a lot of, like all of the surrounding states with Israel. For this lecture, we're not going to get in very much into Israel and Palestine and Jordan, but it's important to understand that Israel and Jordan at like a governmental level today are pretty close, and they're very like, there's lots of like political statements, but in terms of like actual cooperation, there's quite a bit of cooperation, and the US gives a lot of aid to both of them. But there is this long history of war between them that's very deeply ingrained within the populace, like within people's hearts and minds of like Israel is the enemy of Arabs, of Islam, of like peace, that they're colonizers. So like this is very present, and you'll encounter this all the time. But just like just be aware that this is like not a governmental stance. Like the government is not actually at war with Israel right now, and there's lots of collaboration and cooperation. They have consulates and diplomatic exchanges, and like multiple like Jordanians who attack Israelis have been sentenced to death in Jordan in recent history. So that's like important to understand in modern history that there is that Israel has that relationship with them, but it's very complicated and it differs depending on what like level, what class you're in society, that sort of thing. All right, demographics, 9.5 million as of 2015, but about 3 million of that, just under 1/3, are non-citizens, including refugees and illegal immigrants. So you have lots of Iraqis and Syrians and various groups coming in at different times as refugees. But if you look up how many Palestinians there are in Jordan, which is the largest repository of Palestinians in the world, if you want to get some Palestinians, there's a lot of different numbers. So there's numbers about people who have like some kind of Palestinian like citizenship or refugee status. There's people who count anyone that came from Palestine, even if they've now acquired citizenship in Jordan. But at a cultural level and a social level, most in Jordan, it's if you're of Palestinian descent through your father's line. You're Palestinian. You might be Jordanian of Palestinian descent, and you're actually treated differently. And there's, this is something that you'll hear different things on from different people. Palestinians will often be very upset about this, that there's discrimination against them for like being, like, I've been a Jordanian citizen my whole life. My father was a Jordanian citizen, but because my grandfather came from Palestine, I am Palestinian for all like non-legal purposes. And if you'll ask like more educated and wealthy and like westernized Jordanians about this, we're like, oh, well that's like a thing that happened in the past, but not really now. But if you push a little harder, I have yet to find someone who thinks that it's possible for a Jordanian of Palestinian descent to be prime minister or to be a general in the army. That they would not be able to, not because of legal restrictions, but because society and the community and the bureaucracy would not allow them to. And there is ongoing politics between Israel and Jordan and various groups about should Jordan just be the homeland for Palestinians? Because a lot of people say that there's actually more Palestinians in Jordan than Jordanians. And that's, I think, like if we're talking about like just like Palestinian descent, people who identify as Palestinians, I think that's pretty accurate. So various groups, particularly Israeli groups, say there is a Palestinian homeland, it's Jordan. And prior to like 1948, there was no difference between Transjordan and Palestine, and they would have been happy to live there. It's only because they hate Israel that they don't accept Jordan as their homeland. There's pushback on this from various sides, mostly like Palestinians are like, no, it's not our land, and Jordanians are like, no, we don't want any more Palestinians because we don't like them, and they take our jobs. That's it. So bear in mind this like, so a lot of people when they introduce themselves to you will say, like, I'm Jordanian of Palestinian descent. So let's say min asl Philistine, and they'll explain that to you if you don't understand what that means. And it's actually an important identity thing, for better or for worse, for a lot of people. Though there has been a couple of instances where students have asked someone, like, oh, you're of Palestinian descent? And the person was like, that's a little rude. Do you like walk up to people and be like, oh, you seem to be of Black African descent? That was something that happened to a student on our program. So be aware that this was rare. I don't think it'll happen most of the time, but like you are asking, like this is a sensitive question that people are discriminated against for, but it's also like an important identity thing that a lot of people will bring up. And a lot of people will be like, oh, I wouldn't really hang out with that group of your friends because they're Jordanian and I'm Palestinian, or vice versa, which is something I encountered. We'll get to like treatment of classes, but for the first of these like demographic things, migrant workers, Egyptians, Syrian refugees are often treated as second-class citizens. So there's jobs that a Jordanian wouldn't do that an Egyptian would do, because that's why Egyptians are in the country, is to do that kind of labor. And that's like not like, it's not like a shame thing in the sense of like, there are worse people. It's like, oh, that's just the way things are, and it's shameful for a Jordanian to do those things.
Are they considered lower than Palestinians? We're getting into class stuff, but
Yeah, so my experience would be Egyptians, like Egyptian migrant workers are like lower in class than Palestinians. Like some of your experience? Yeah. Like lots of Palestinians are like very wealthy and successful, but only in the private sector. In the public sector, there's a lot of barriers to them. So now there's actually become an almost economic divide between these groups, where the private sector is dominated by Palestinians within Jordan, and the public sector is dominated by Jordanians. And we'll actually talk about how that continues to be that way within cultural differences. All right. Religion, predominantly Muslim, 95%, 93% is Sunni Muslim. It's very like homogenous in that sense. State funds mosques. There is a ministry of Awqaf, I don't know, the religious ministry, that you pay taxes and you contribute to that. But the Christian community is respected and an important part of Jordanian culture, and there's like Christians and Muslims will have friends. I didn't see any like major issues between them, but there is like areas that like that's a Christian area that there's more distinction between them. But like young people would be friends, and older people like have respect for each other, and it's like not like it's not shameful to like have your kids be friends with someone that's a Christian. Some of the lowest communities of Christians in the world are from Jordan.
But Christians will remind you regularly that the limited opportunities, right? So the Christians wear this on their sleeve. And I'm not saying that it doesn't happen, but it's Muslims tend to say, oh yeah, we're all Jordanians, right? You'll see all over the place this, what's the, Kulna Urdu, yani Urdu, or what's the, I'm trying to remember, I've got a slide here. Yeah. Yeah, it says, oh, we're all Jordanians, right? And then you start talking to Palestinians, and you start talking to Christians, you realize that, oh, that was a Jordanian official pronouncement.
Yeah.
And not everybody feels quite as... But on the other hand, one thing that I've noticed over the years is there used to be more annoyance with this, and right now everybody's pretty happy just to be in a place that is not in the middle of a civil war.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like, go king, go. Yeah, you know.
Yeah, and we were going to talk about that a little bit later on, but just something to like have on your mind is Jordan, luckily for you all, is an island of peace in what appears to be like the awful fallout of mostly the Arab Spring. Like people like searching for supposedly these like ideals of democracy and equality and whatever. Like they look at Egypt and they look at Syria in particular and they're like, you know what? We're pretty good. We're quite happy. So that like when you like go in, I would advise against going and being like, yeah, Arab Spring, I also love democracy. Because a lot of Jordanians would be like, whoa, like we generally prefer like safety and our lives and our livelihood to democracy, like the democracy of Syria today. Like we don't want that at all. There's 1.4 million Syrians in our country right now because of democracy. So be aware that is like, it's a lot harder to advocate for revolution when it's your own country, and that's something that a lot of times we struggle with. Government, constitutional monarchy, 2 chambers of legislature, the king appoints the Senate, the House of Representatives is elected. The king has a lot of power and can dissolve the parliament if he needs to, if he thinks he needs to, if he would like to. And the king is a very important figure. We'll get to the figure of the king a little bit later. But does anyone like have like questions about the government setup that they care about? Like this was, I think it's important to understand there is a king, but there's also like elected officials, and it's a constitutional monarchy.
So, I don't know a ton about government structure a lot of times, but England has a similar sort of system, but it's my understanding that the king of Jordan has more power
Yes.
than the monarchy in Britain.
Yeah, so the monarchy in Britain, the queen has very little power. There's like most of her remaining like actual powers have to do with like symbolic things like declaring war that would have to be agreed on by parliament, that sort of thing. The king is the commander-in-chief of the military. He has a lot of power over the legislature and also over the judiciary, but mostly over the legislator, that I don't think that you see in a lot of other governmental systems. Like in the US, the president of the US couldn't just say, you know what, I don't really like how many Muslim Brotherhood representatives there are in the Senate these days, I'm gonna dissolve it. But that actually happened in Jordan, like right after the Arab Spring, that there was concerns that the parliament had too much representation by Islamist groups, not like militant Islamists, but Islamists, and among them Muslim Brotherhood. So the king dissolved the parliament, and there was new elections held to like vote in another parliament once the like interim period was up. So the king has a lot more power than, I can't think, I don't like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's any like European monarchies that where there's as much power vested in the king.
Who can vote?
I think all citizens.
Yeah, people vote, but not everybody's vote counts the same. So it's complicated.
Yeah, and there's also like district voting. There's quotas that affect it. So like there's like 2 seats assured for Christians in the House of Representatives. I think 10 seats assured for women in it. So there's a party list system. I don't know. This is like, you'll talk about it with your teachers in Jordan actually, because it's like an interesting topic and you'll learn all those words in Arabic. But it does use a quota-based system, which I think is interesting and something maybe you think about going in, being like, is that an effective way to deal with discrimination and representation? All right.
You're basically looking at the trappings of democracy, but a very, very powerful monarchy and very powerful tribes. The tribes, you're probably going to get to that. So.
Yeah, we can talk about it here. Very tribal society. Tribes, like the biggest tribes are basically in control of the Senate. They will decide on things, and that's the reason that a lot of legislation gets bogged down to deal with corruption, nepotism, that sort of thing, because of how strong the tribes are. If you're from a powerful tribe, you, like, in terms of corruption, you'll often like be able to get away with crimes or not be stopped by police, that sort of thing. You'll always have access to jobs, whatever. There's a couple of zones in Jordan where the police aren't allowed to go because it's under tribal law, and like a specific tribe has like jurisdiction there, and like someone could be killed and the police couldn't do something in that area, which terrifies me. I haven't been there. I've been told that it's not that scary, but they also told me I shouldn't go there. So I don't really know how to deal with those mixed messages. Arab Spring attitudes, told you about that. The king. Actually, we'll start with intelligence services to help you understand the king. No one told me this, but there are like informants all over the place. Like people are scared of saying things against the government because there are people who are paid to tell if someone says something against the government, particularly on university campuses. And 2017 Democracy Index, Jordan was ranked as unfree in terms of freedom of the press. It's generally not ranked as an actual democracy by most democracy indexes. And I don't know if y'all have heard the word mukhabarat. It is like intelligence services. But if someone starts to say something like against the regime, like one of you, like people, your teachers will think that like, they'll like kind of say it jokingly, but they're actually serious. They're like, oh, mukhabarat. Like let's watch our words. So, no one will speak openly against the king. And I actually think there's a very strong narrative that people believe in, that the king's awesome. Like people love the king. But I have heard some people say things against the king, but it was in very private context, and they pulled me aside and they whispered to me in like a closed room. They're like, hey, he's basically British. So like his mother's British, he was educated in Britain and the US, and he wasn't actually the crown prince until just before his father's death, because his father changed the crown prince from his uncle to him, and he came back, and he did it. And he's actually done like lots of great things as a king, and there's lots of things to applaud him for. But this like feeling that y'all might have, like however you feel about the current president or past presidents of like being like, I don't like their policies, in Jordan like this, and you're like, I don't like that person, like they're a bad person, like that doesn't fly when you're talking about the king. And it will just be like an interesting thing. I assume that most of you will get like a month and a half, 2 months in before you realize that like some of your close friends actually don't feel the way about the government that they've been saying the whole time that they know you. And then like they'll just like suddenly like trust you enough that they're like, you know, sometimes I don't like censorship. And you're like, I did not even know. But that's something to be aware of, that you can like test the waters for, but also be aware that if you're in a taxi and you like ask a taxi driver like hard questions about the government, like how he feels about that, they'll often get very uncomfortable. And if you're with friends in a taxi and you ask your friends hard questions, they might be uncomfortable because there's a belief that all taxi drivers are actually mukhabarat. And I think that this has a lot of the power of an urban legend in that there's like definitely like less mukhabarat than people believe there is. But at the same time, like I don't have a grasp of like how much it actually is because they have like pretty successfully like stopped public dissent on a number of issues that were important, particularly relating to Israel.
Now, I'm not saying we're going to like go rally in the university.
Yeah, I would advise against it,
But
personally and at an organizational level.
are there things we should watch out for and what we say in certain areas so that we don't become an issue or have an issue with the mukhabarat?
With the mukhabarat, I don't think that that's a huge concern for you. Like, I'm not sure like when something develops into a serious issue, but in terms of respect for people, like I think that like as we get to this culture stuff a little bit later, it's like if you don't agree with something, just like admit that all of us here are pretty early on in our career of cultural analysis and like making normative statements about other countries and governments and cultures. So if you're going to say something that like is like, well, in my opinion, like men should stay at home and women should work and children should be raised in a commune. Like, sure, that's a great opinion. But they're like, why, like, what does it profit you? I don't know. I think that this like, as we get into culture, like this idea of like finding what you have to like give to this country is like the American savior is not going to be a very rich experience for you. Like at the very least, you're going to be frustrated, and you're probably going to like, I don't know. You'll be frustrated on a good day. All right. Questions like historical stuff with Jordan and governmental stuff, that sort of thing.
I know there's some stuff with the Queen as well.
Oh, yes.
Wanted to
The
bring that
Queen.
up.
This was one of the things that I was pulled into a private room and whispered to. The Queen is Palestinian. And she... All right, we'll talk Palestine right now. Stephen, wait, was that you who was talking about Black September? What was Black September?
So the PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization, used to be based in Jordan until King Hussein's daddy decided he didn't want them there anymore. And there was a massive war in September, and a couple thousand Palestinians were killed by the Jordanian army that was fighting out the Palestinians, who then went to Lebanon. And it was a mess, and it was not a pretty situation. And since then, the Palestinians have had a lot worse time off in Jordan.
So, understanding, like when we talk about like discriminations between Palestinians and Jordanians, there's like this like basic stuff that I think lots of countries deal with of like, oh, this is someone different from me coming into my space, that hopefully you can like begin to wrap your heads around, and it'll like also be a helpful experience for that. But there is this history that like actually has armed conflict and terror involved, and one of the previous kings was killed by a Palestinian for perceived like support of Israel. So he was killed by a Palestinian operative, is the belief that, like, we know he's Palestinian, like, he was sent to kill this king by the PLO. And this is like a part of the cultural consciousness that, like, not that long ago, we were at war amongst ourselves, and we had, like, there was violence in the past, so like, this idea of like, can't trust Palestinians, this might also be explained to you as a justification for why they can't be in the military. Like, they can't be in the military, why they can't be like a general or a high-ranking officer. So like, Black September happened, like, can't trust the Palestinians, they'll do anything, get their land back. And then like from the Palestinian side of like, those Jordanians, they really just love the Jews and they'll choose the Jews over us any day of the week. So there's like this historical tension, and Queen Rania, who I think is beautiful, but is actually like not the paradigm of a lot of Arab like beauty standards, but will like be like ragged on by Jordanian guys like, she's not that beautiful, you Americans think she's beautiful, she's not. And one of my like female friends who's a speaking partner was like, that's because she's Palestinian and they can't express like how much they dislike her any other way. But she's like always doing like these charity things, but then she also like goes on these really extravagant shopping trips. And it's like hard to say that she's like a like super bad person, but also it's like not like completely altruistic in all the things that she's doing in my like reading of the situation. But there is like this weird like Palestinian tension, like our king, who was like son of a British woman, raised in Britain, went to school in Britain and America, and then just like became our king, then married a Palestinian. Like Palestinians like that, but what about us? What about the Jordanians? So there's tension there. Okay, we're gonna move on to culture after this, but I would like to give you all a 5-minute break. So 5:45 we start again. Does that work for everyone? Sweet. All right, go. Break.
We're gonna go over 1967.